Hello and welcome to the first season of Talk Sustainability with Sandeep. I'm your host Sandeep Raghuvanshi, and over the course of this podcast series, we will deep dive into corporate sustainability from an Indian context and investigate more through our conversations with multiple relevant stakeholders. So, the moment one thinks of cooked food being wasted, immediately images of people not having access to adequate nutrition comes to mind. India ranks very low in hunger index, and pockets of people with less access to nutrition are always in close proximity. So it appears logical that if someone can just connect the two by collecting the excess and delivering to the deficit, we can find perfect solution. But it may not always be as simple as it sounds. We have today Srishti Jain, who is doing this at a massive scale, and we will learn from her what does it take to do this successfully. With a network of more than 26,000 volunteers across more than 100 cities in India, Zomato Feeding India is among the largest in field of food rescue. And Srishti Jain has been a co-founder and she has been leading this initiative since the beginning. Srishti, please tell us a little bit more about the scale and scope of your food rescue programs.
Sure, Sandeep. Thank you, first of all, for having me here. Like you rightly mentioned, right, that these are two very, very basic problems, and it almost seems like a man-made problem that we have excess food on one side and we have a lot of demand of people not having food on the other side. So that's how our organization really started. It actually, if I just give you a story, it started when our my colleague Ankit went to a wedding and saw a lot of food being wasted. And on the next very red light, he saw a lot of people asking for food. So we just connect both the dots and we say it's really, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's just very basic problem that you take food from where it's extra and give it to people who really, really need it. So essentially, that's what we started with, and we have different models to address the same problem. Like you also mentioned, India ranks has actually the highest number of hungry people in the world. All right, not many people know that. People still think it's a country in Africa that might have a lot of hunger, but
In sheer
actually,
numbers, I mean, you mean in sheer numbers,
yeah,
right? Yes.
yes. So the highest number of hungry population in the world. So nutrition and hunger are very closely related. So, and India suffers a lot of malnutrition as well, where people are stunted or people are wasted, which means the people are not as per the weight or height that they're supposed to be. So that is a huge, huge problem in India. At the same time, we're wasting food, one third of the food that's produced in the country, which is worth crores at the moment.
I think that, see, I mean, this, as I said, right? So this appears logical, right? That if you have excess
Yeah.
food, and we are talking about weddings, and there was some estimation I was reading that you have almost 30
Mm.
to 40% of food in a wedding is wasted. And
Yeah.
because our weddings are also as per, some special days, there in a
Mm.
single evening, you might be wasting the amount of food which could probably feed the entire hungry population of that city for a week. But
Yes.
I'm sure that it is not as simple as it sounds, right? So what are the sources that you look for? How do they connect with you? How do they connect? How do you connect with them? And what are their challenges with the waste?
Yeah, completely on the same point. So we have what we've noticed in the past 6 years that we've been working is that there are some primary candidates or sources of unsold food or uneaten or wasted food. These are mostly, like you said, large gatherings, big events, be it weddings, corporate events, or any kind of public gathering. It might be a government rally, etc., etc., where there are a lot of people, coming together. There might be corporate cafeterias where food is cooked in bulk, factories, all of these places. There might be supermarkets, where again there is excess food. Now, excess food again is of different categories. It might be cooked excess food, packaged about expiry excess food. That also comes in this category, right? If we talk about big events, gatherings, caterers usually, and that's what we've discussed with over several interaction, is that they have to have a certain buffer that they cook for, be it gatherings or cafeterias, and they have to keep that margin for the customer as well. So invariably, what happens if I just talk about it mathematically, if 1,000 guests are invited to a wedding or there are 1,000 people in a company, the caterer usually cooks for 1,000 or 1,100, right? Or maybe 10% more or 20% more. And not everyone everyone turns up, which, and suppose 800 turn up, so food for 300 would be extra even at that wedding. And like you said, there might be thousands of such events in one single day. Similarly, in supermarkets, customers always, in India, the growing trend is, of course, that people check for about expiry products, the dates mentioned on the packaging, and usually, supermarkets and the distributors, retailers, they have certain policies that they call back or recall products when it's crossed or it's near to expiry. These products again are burnt on after call back, or maybe at the wholesaler level or the distributor level, again, which leads to excess food and food wastage. So mostly these are the sources that we've identified. There's one at the institutional level that I just talked about. There's again at a household level, which is food wasted at home, which at the moment constitutes of a smaller percentage than if you're talking about institutional food wastage. So the other category in institutional is also restaurants. But what we've noticed so far, mostly this happens during in buffet restaurants serving buffets and not really a la carte.
Let's take first these big gatherings, right? So the weddings or parties and rallies or cafeterias, etc. Now,
Yeah.
as you said, that there will be a certain inventory of food that will be prepared, which will be in excess of the expected number of people, so that you are not short, because that is
Yeah.
absolutely a situation they need to avoid, right? In
Yeah.
whatever manner, whether they're charging or whether it is pre-booked, in whatever manner, but it is part of the sale. So it is linked with the sale. They need to have little more. Now, as you
Hmm.
said, there is a possibility that instead of having little more, you may have less number of people. So you will have
Hmm.
a portion of food that is not served, but
Hmm.
also you will have a certain portion of food which was served and not eaten, right? Which will be basically from the
Exactly.
customer plates. And these are two totally
Hmm.
different problems altogether, because one is you can do some rescue, on other you cannot
Yeah.
do some rescue, you have to do something else, some processing with that, right? So how
Yeah.
exactly your system works, I would presume you primarily work with the unserved part of the food. So how exactly the collection process works, how do they inform you, what is the logistical way in which you manage this whole process?
Of course. So again, the logistics and the operations depend on the source of food and the quantity of food, right? First of all, clearing what you mentioned, there is one food which we call as half-eaten food, which is in plates that is leftover, and the other is, suppose we're serving in a buffet and is leftover in the serving plates, right? In the bin maries that they call it in cafeterias. So we take food that is completely untouched and good to eat and fit for consumption, which is in the bin maries and not from the plates. Food left over in the plates, unfortunately, goes to the dustbins. It is encouraged that we use we compost it and we have other means to dispose it, but it is not fit for human consumption. Coming to the operational and the logistic part of it, connecting, and that's the main crux of the system, right? Connecting excess food with demand is honestly just a logistic problem and nothing else. And that's what we're trying to solve. So it depends on the quantity food and the source of food. So if I talk about households, the quantity of food wastage is less. In this case, it's not practical for someone to come and pick it 5 sandwiches up from a house and donate it, right? The resources spent in traveling to the donation spot and to donating it eventually will be more than what we save. So essentially, the entire trade-off is what is the resources that we're trying to save in the overall operations. So, for example, if the quantity of food is for more than 50 people, in case of any cooperative and supermarkets, it makes sense logistically and in a cost-effective manner that we can pick it up and donate it as well.
So
Whereas if
would you
the
say
food,
that would you say that
yeah,
50 meals is sort of that minimum which cuts the mark for it to become feasible to be rescued?
yes, yes, feasible for to be rescued via say a van.
Mhm.
So yeah. So let me come to a scenario where if there's excess food left over at a corporate cafeteria or in any gathering, food for say 50 or above. What happens is we have devised a program called the Magic Wheel, which is a 24/7 running vehicle that picks up and donates food in a way that it restores the temperature, it ensures that the quality of the food is maintained throughout, right? it only makes sense for us to send that vehicle if the food quality is of quantity is of minimum 50 people. If it's for less than 50 people, we try to encourage the donor to donate it themselves by redirecting them to a place near them where they can give food.
Okay, I think
Yeah.
that definitely is clear. But you said that this is primarily a logistical challenge. When
Yeah.
I think about it, I would imagine that you would, while on the supply, you may have, let's say, a certain pattern that you could also see, and you could contact with these
Hmm.
event managers, etc. And you can have a calendar of what their events are planned, and hence you may have some calculations that you can make about what is the expected supply that would come. But I'm sure that
Yes,
you will have to also do some similar analysis on the demand side. Or is it something that
exactly.
you have pockets of demand which are always available? How exactly the demand works for that?
Exactly. I think you're spot on. So, what essentially I'll tell you, I'll just try to paint the picture. If you take Delhi NCR, for example, how we solve this logistical problem is in the sense that we say we have identified hunger spots or areas where they have demand in certain parts of the city. At the same time, we've mapped supply spots that where we can get excess food in the same pockets of the city, right? And we match those specifically for excess food. If we talk about hunger spots, not everyone can or is willing to accept excess food. That is again one of the challenges that comes from in this why I'm calling it a logistical challenge, because not everyone can or is willing to accept excess food. The options to donate it become less. So you have to ensure that where you pick it up from and where you donate it is in close proximity to ensure the quality does not go bad. The timings match on when we pick up and donate and all of that. So that is why it's essentially a challenge.
And this is exactly the point I would want to sort of delve a little deeper
Hmm.
into, because so when you have your supplies which would be coming from these events, I would presume that the hour of the day, or let's say of the
Hmm.
night, might be a little bit late by
Hmm.
the time they will have a certainty that this is now the excess food that we are left over with, right?
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
and from the pockets where you have your demand which is coming up now, what, because let's say if it's an organization, let's an orphanage or some other place where you have to take it to, they may have some plans for their own dinners also. So how exactly do you
Hmm.
manage that part?
Yeah. So what we do is over the last few years since we've running this project, we have established and set up such, uh, in the sense, adopted these hunger spots or these NGOs in a way that we give them food every single day, even if it is excess food. And how we do it is we have multiple sources of food, excess food, and we know that and we've matched it to these demand sources. So it is reliably ensured that we will be giving them food every single day. So they don't prepare for food otherwise. Our work is not to, just replace meals, but to give meals in a way that it also ends up saving the overall resources. So in a way that it is guaranteed to these demand centers that they will receive food every single day. And how we map, like you said, they might be at odd hours. We have helped them with the, logistical facilities they might need. So we might only select demand spot that have a refrigeration facility to store food overnight and heat it in the morning and have it again.
I mean, the centers where you guarantee that you will supply meals on an everyday
Hmm.
basis, you will take care of their
Hmm.
meal supplies. Typically,
Hmm.
what percentage of your total supply that comes out in a city get consumed by such managed demand centers?
Almost all of it, right? Because right now it's so we have two kinds of demand centers. One is where we ensure that they guarantee, reliably will get meals served. The second is that they're ready and informed in advance if we're getting, meals for them as well. Which might be in case of any call that we've received in, out of the blue saying that we have an event here, please pick up food, which is not expected in advance, but because we have this call, we inform our standby demand centers that this is what you're going to be getting. Please do not prepare your meal and act accordingly. So I would say about 80% is of, where we, out of our supplies, where we serve meals regularly. And the remaining is of on an ad hoc basis.
Okay, I think that's quite interesting, because if you have 80% of your supplies which are coming, or let's say part of the total supplies that you make, if that is fixed, then of course it reduces the challenge, and that's where I think that's probably the secret of
Hmm.
your success to be able to run it at such a massive scale. Just
Yeah.
one question on this before we move to the next topic. Now when we talk about nutrition, right, so of course it is not about any food, so it has to be in certain proportions so that it becomes a balanced
Yeah.
diet, because as you said that it's undernutrition is a problem, but overnutrition is also a problem. So how exactly
Hmm.
do you manage that when your supplies may have a certain variability which might be involved in
Hmm.
that, but when you'll be
Hmm.
serving these meals in these places you may want to have a certain standardized kind of portions. So how exactly
Hmm.
that process works?
Exactly. So that is one of the challenges with excess food, that is that you cannot predict or cannot tell your donor that only this is left, or there's no roti left today and all of that, right? Or there's no bread left. Of course, the point here is not to ask them to create more food, because the entire the goal of the system and what we're trying to solve is to reduce food wastage. So what we try to do here is that we map food from different supply sources and ensure that the minimum that is needed for that demand center is met. So even if we have to club food from, say, multiple supply centers and make one proper meal and then give it to a beneficiary center, that's what we do. And we have then matched these supply centers to these demand centers, saying that okay, these 5 places of supply will cater to this one demand center. So even if there is fluctuation in any of the supply centers, it won't affect what is eventually sent to that demand center, and their bare minimum will always be met. In terms of components of the meal, that is essentially pulses and grain, like rice, and like for the rice slash roti or pulses is always there. There's always there's also vegetables that is sometimes included. Maybe it may be salad or a sweet dish as well. So it might be a good day when we might get everything: a bread, vegetable, pulses, salad, sweets, or the bare minimum is bread, vegetables, and pulses. So that minimum component always happens.
Okay, and I think, I mean, that so the serving portions will be decided at the destination, or you have sort of some intermediate step that you follow where all the food that is rescued comes to a place and then it goes. So how exactly your model? Does it is it point to point, or how exactly that works?
See, the tricky thing here is, like I said, excess food, when you've taken it, and you've taken that up from where it was served, after that, it is a time bomb, right? You need to serve it within its shelf life, or there is no point of the entire activity. So there is no scope for us to collect it in one location and then take it to a point of distribution. We have to have the logistics so well connected that we pick it up from one location, immediately within a certain period it is donated to and it is consumed, donated and consumed. So our and we work with different tech platforms to ensure that our routes are very well optimized, right? uh, uh, so what
Can
we
I
do
ask you?
there.
Can I ask you
Yeah.
how many routes and how many vehicles do you operate?
Yeah, can you just hold on, I'll just pull up the numbers.
Because I think
Quickly
this
check.
this appears to be a very complex operation, and it's I can imagine how much of logistical challenges will go in that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. um, So we have around 86 vehicles in 30 cities at the moment. And when we say these 86 vehicles, they're almost, picking up from more than 300 locations, pan India. So like I said, it is a big logistic platform, a network that we have to create, and we use platforms to ensure that our routes are optimized. Picking up to delivery to consumption time is minimized. The food shelf life is taken into consideration. Quality checks are done. The drivers are trained. There are FSSAI license that we have. There's a lot more science and tech that goes behind these operations.
and it's good that you brought up the FSA license, because that is what
Yeah.
was my next question. That what are the different regulatory aspects over here, also
Hmm.
from those who are generating this excess food,
Yeah.
and that apply
Hmm.
on you and on the consumers.
Yeah. Exactly. I think the regulatory challenges are the key. That is the biggest challenge of this industry and in this space, right? Let me, tell you a story. 5 years back or 6 years back when we started, there
Mhm.
was no organization in the country that was looking at excess food donation. So when we really started with first creating an awareness about this challenge and awareness about the solution of it, right? In that at that time there was no organization which was doing it, and similarly because of that there was no law in the country to address something like this. Over the last 6 years, when we've really spread awareness, got this up to speed, partnered with the biggest of players and industry leaders in the space, the similar conversation were then initiated from our end with the government as well, because we were facing a lot of resistance or some challenges from, like you said, the food waste generators and from the beneficiary side as well. And there was high time that there should be a law to really regulate or even recognize a solution like this was possible. So we got in touch with FSSAI, and together FSSAI and Feeding India created like a standardized SOP, in a sense that says that regulates what and essentially a player in this field needs to follow. Unfortunately, we do not have a proper legal law again, to authorize this process, but we do have a regulation that was issued very recently by FSSAI, which says that excess food donation is allowed in the country, and some basic regulations that need to be followed by any one person or an organization that is in this space. But at the same time, unlike the Western countries or maybe some European countries, we do not have the Good Samaritan law in India, which safeguards a food donor in case of the liability of food, which is the biggest challenge that we currently face, while approaching food waste donors.
In fact, this was going to be my next question, because you having an SOP is
Hmm.
one thing, right? But it doesn't necessarily
Yeah,
prevent a liability from being generated. And
exactly.
now liability could be on the organization that is acting as the conduit, as the food rescuer, but can also be on the generator, right? So what?
Yeah.
So if you can help us understand that, the food generators, do they have anonymity once they have given to your organization, or is it possible to trace it back to them? Do they want it or do they not want it?
Yeah. So there are a lot of ifs and buts here. Since there is no Good Samaritan law in the country, Feeding India has proactively, set up its own SOPs. So one, what we did was we got in touch with the experts in the field, and industry leaders, I would say, people who are doing the biggest catering in the country or worldwide, health experts, food and safety hygiene experts, dietitian, nutritionist, all of them, and set up a standard SOP, which is much, much more complicated what FSSAI has mandated for its food waste agencies working in excess food. So our SOP is very, very thorough, which includes temperature checks, label data, impact reporting data, quality checks, transit point checks, FSSAI training, FOSTAC training, all of that, right? Which is what we follow internally with all our programs. What we have done also is set up a legal structure internally, not which is not mandated by FSSAI or any other government body, but which we follow internally, which release the food donor of the liability, and at the same time freeze Feeding India of the liability in transit. And once we donate it to the NGO, then the liability of the food is on them. So internally we have created that legal structure to give comfort to our food donors. But like you said, giving food, releasing of the liability is one thing, but suppose, which if in any case what happens is something goes wrong, the food donors don't want to be held responsible for it, because, and that is not currently possible in our climate of legal structure. So what we do in that case is, if the food donor wants, we do not, if they want anonymity, we do that. There are multiple food donors who don't want their name out, but at the same time there are a lot of, and actually a lot more food donors who want to be industry leaders in this space and publicly want to lead by example. So that is when they are very, very open on sharing reports and their what and part and sharing that they've partnered with us.
Oh, I mean, I think that's great. So now, if we So now there is essentially no real excuse, if you would say, right? Because the
Yeah.
donors have the cover of anonymity, they have a liability protection also, and
Hmm.
there is a reasonable certainty that in any event there will be a certain amount of excess food that will be there. So
Yeah.
from the coverage that you have, which of the areas that you find the maximum rescuability of the
Hmm.
food from the cooperation that comes out from those event organizers and all, and which are the areas where you feel that they can do much better than what they are doing right now to take advantage of the kind of services that you provide to them.
Yeah, I think large gatherings, be it in as weddings, events, or office cafeterias, are a are the biggest source of food, excess food at the moment. Um, Again, the second upcoming source is what I see is supermarkets, when there are about expiry products, all of that. That also, generate a lot of waste. In If you look at countries like the US or a lot of European or UK also, they primarily and only rely on food banks for because of packaged food. They don't have a concept of donating cooked food at all. The only source of food for them, for the food banks, is packaged food. So in India, that concept has yet not started. So one aspect, and where I would say more encouragement would be from supermarkets, grocery shops, all of that. The second is again from these corporates and event organizers, wherein they recognize that they have excess food, but because of, say, the upper management not agreeing with the concept or fear of liability, they are not taking the bold step of actually saying that we can donate excess food. They would rather donate that food to and get it composted, which is again a good solution but not the ideal solution. So as per stages of food wastage, if there is food that is fit for human consumption, ideally it should be donated to someone who is hungry, and not be given to animals or be put in, and be or composted. So if yeah.
No, I think, I mean, what you say is very right, because if you have cooked food that is still fit for human consumption, it has gone through so much of processing from the time it has been grown and processed, collected, cooked,
Yeah.
ingredients are put in, everything has been done. So the best use must be that if we can find a way for it to be consumed, and anything else should be the next steps, right? It should be lower down the
Yeah.
pecking order. So this does appear the most logical one. Now, you said
Hmm.
that the weddings are the ones who are using these services in the most effective manner, and
Hmm.
probably the supermarkets, and I presume we are talking about packaged food, right? So the ready to eat
Hmm.
kind of meals and all from supermarkets. On the
Hmm.
consumer side, which kind of organizations do you find, or which kind of pockets do you find are making the best use of the services that you provide, and who are the ones who can do much better and learn from others and they can benefit from these?
See, in a country like India, the number of hungry people are much, much more. Like the quantum is so high that there is very, very little, room for choice that they have. In which case, they are, for them, getting access to food is a priority than choosing what kind of food we're getting. But what I've seen is the most effective and the most useful manner in which we've given food, and what we see really, really working well, is when we give food to kids, and specifically schools that are non-government, or maybe slum school as we call it, right? So in these pockets, as consumers or as beneficiaries, we're giving food to children as an incentive to come to these schools. So imagine there were schools where currently the attendance was below, or the attendance was below 30%. The kids would prefer going to a garbage dump with their parents, and because they could earn some amount of money so they can buy a meal. And now, parallelly, we have the same kid going to school just because he gets food in that non-government or a slum school. At the same time, there is education, and that they're getting, and they're getting value out of the system. But primary driver for that kid is that food. So when we see that we match these supply pockets to these demand pockets, and specifically slum schools, is where we see massive, massive value being generated.
So the intended outcomes definitely are great, right? I mean,
Yeah,
from attracting more kids to these schools and to make sure that you can take care and reduce at least the nutrition deficiency in certain pockets. Are there
yeah.
any unintended consequences or negative consequences that you are aware of, which are part and parcel of what is done? Because that generally is one of the challenges with so many of these impact projects, right? That you may have a lot of these intended benefits, but there are some unintended consequences also which get generated, which
Hmm.
one learns over a period of time. Are there any that you have figured out so far?
So in terms of excess food, what we've seen is, I may not call it negative benefits, but um, this is something that we realized very recently, that when we had some donors, food supply donors, who were giving food to us very very regularly, say 6 months, 7 months, and after usually we started noticing this, that after the 7 or 8 month mark, the quantity of excess food started reducing, right? That we collected. So now, to feed the same demand center, we need more partners to ensure reliability for those children as well, right? So the unintended effect, and what we see, which is great, is that eventually the food, excess food, and which is wasted, goes less, which is the desired outcome, right? The primary goal is to reduce food wastage, and whatever is left, then we want to channelize it in the most efficient and cost effective manner. So
Because you help them to
the
measure it.
unintended, yeah,
Because you help them to
exactly.
measure it.
So exactly. So before we came in the picture, they had no idea that they had excess food, or the quantum of the excess food that they have. Of course, as a caterer or as a supplier, you have to have a buffer of the quantity, and those are unavoidable circumstances. But the excess that they were producing just generally was reduced considerably over time. So now there is a standard excess food that they cook at the moment, and though the inefficiencies that they had on their side have been reduced considerably.
So now when you see your operations and you have such a long experience of running it, both in terms of time and now the geography and scale and everything, what kind of innovations would you wish to come in this field to make whatever you are doing much easier, much better, or even sort of
Mm.
in ways which currently are not being done? So what are those innovative processes, methods, or technologies that you would like to see in this part of in this kind of operation?
Yeah. And honestly, Zomato Feeding India, our organization, we've used tech very, very heavily in our entire process. So we have actually and honestly really uh, mastered the process in terms of optimizing it tech wise, right? Logistically, cost effective manner, all of that. But the one thing that we still feel that there is scope to improve on, and which actually requires considerable R&D, is instant food testing kits. At the moment, all our team, that is the staff that we have on ground, which is responsible for collecting and distributing food, is trained on is given fast track training, which is something mandated by FSSAI. Is given, they have regular medical checkup, health checkups, and they have a primary, very very basic checklist to check the quality of the food while picking it up and before donating it. And they record everything very very carefully, everything from the texture, odor, smell, taste, everything, down to the quantity, the time, the temperature, everything. So but what would be better and great if we could find some sort of a way to do the food test in an instant manner and check, maybe we check the pH level, maybe there's a small kit which can be regularly used, one time kit, not maybe not a every time test, something around that sense, thing, to maybe extend the quality of the food or check the quality of the food. At the moment, if one needs to check the quality of the food, they need to do a microbiological test. That itself takes 2 to 3 days to for us to get the result, which is not feasible in our operations.
Sure, I can imagine that, and probably there could be some more help that you may get from the sources, where if you can get a
Yeah.
little bit more early warning and you could probably plan your logistics better. I would imagine so, right?
Yep. Yep. Exactly.
So,
And actually,
yes.
to that point, I'll add what we have done, and that's why I say, we've really really solved this problem as well. That we've made calendars with these institutions, so it's not that we only go to them when they have excess food. We go to them every single day, because we've made calendars and logistics in such a way that we know where to go when. So it's more predictive than reactive.
I see. So that's definitely. So you are already very close, because in the end, over a period of time, I think both will also find a balance in that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's been a very helpful, Shrishti. You have shared a lot, but before we end this call, is there anything that you would want to say to anyone who's listening to this, from what they can learn from whatever you're doing, what you imagine that the world should be doing more than what it is doing right now?
Of course, I think there's so much more to be done. I don't think we've covered even 1% of the problem when not one organization can solve it. I feel a lot of people need to step up and, just take it upon themselves to solve this as well. Maybe, set up organizations or maybe do it at an individual level. The awareness really needs to be more in terms of that if I see excess food or if I see food waste happening, this is what I can do. Maybe if not at an organizational level, at an individual level, right? Because this is something that needs a behavioral change. A lot of people still think that excess food should not be donated, or excess food is not safe for consumption, or we would get into trouble if we donate excess food. So it's more about a change of mindset and becoming more aware about the problem rather than just being passive and not reacting to how world is changing around you. This is, like I said, hunger is a man-made problem. It can be solved, and especially connecting excess food to supply, to demand, is just that it's a logistical challenge. It's just access to food is the challenge here, and not less food.
I think this you have brought out so many important points in this conversation, because excess food is also is not something which is unintended, right? Excess food, they're
Yeah,
part of the reason that excess food exists is because it is part of the systems and processes that are being followed.
yeah,
You have grocery stores, you have the caterings, you have these parties, and by design you have to have certain excess food. But just because by design you have to have an excess food does not necessarily mean that it has to be wasted only. There are means by
mm,
which it can be rescued, and you have demonstrated that it is possible for someone with vision and someone with the grit to be able to put up systems in places that you can do that at scale. I think what you also
mm,
highlighted is that there are challenges in the process, and the intention of being able to do that alone is not sufficient. It is very
yeah,
important to also be able to build an organization which will have all the challenges that you will have for any other kind of organization if you want to do it at scale. Otherwise it will be a
mm,
neighborhood, and you could only do a very limited impact with what you are able to do. And all the
mm,
corporates and everyone, I think it's very important that they should start measuring the amount of
mm,
food that we are talking about, because this is a huge quantity, and you're demonstrating that how large this is when we start looking at it on aggregated basis. But even for individual organizations, if they start measuring, they will be able to see that what is the size of this waste we are talking about, and hence they can put systems, processes in place. They can make certain investments in their processes
yeah,
and facilities to reduce that, which is the
yeah,
intended outcome. It probably increases your effort a little bit more, but I think that's a huge saving that you do for the
yeah,
nation and for the world, right?
exactly, 100%.
So thank you very much, Shrishti, for this conversation today. We
No
will end.
problem. Pleasure's all mine. Yeah.
I hope that this conversation was useful. While complete elimination of waste may not be possible, there are multiple options available on how to handle it. The food rescue organizations in your neighborhood can help distribute the portion of the leftover food that is still fit for human consumption. As we saw, there is an increasing professionalism and sophistication in the way our food rescue ecosystem is evolving. I hope this was thought provoking and has some learnings and takeaways for you. If you are someone who has useful information on this subject or have success stories that you would like to share, please reach out to me. We need to build a community from all walks of life across the value chain to do our little bit in solving this problem. There are many things that divide us, but planet Earth unites us. Stay tuned for more content on sustainability. Take care and stay safe.